Welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors, and today we are going to talk about some of the uses and selecting a telemeter. So for those of you not familiar with the Winson Laboratories telemeter, these are super handy devices that you can use for a myriad of different things. Today we're going to talk a little bit about just a few of the things that you can do with these telemeters, and then we're going to go into about selecting them because we have different designs. Recently I did a video on how to range find with these, and so we'll talk a little bit about range finding, but if you're interested, you can watch that video to kind of give you an idea of how these things kind of function. In many ways, it's a low-tech but high-utility piece of gear. It can be used as a backup to other types of equipment, being that it's analog-based, whether it be calculators or navigation tables, protractors, all sorts of different types of tools that you might have with you out in the field. You can use this device as a kind of a backup. In many situations, you may not be able to carry like an item like a GPS, for instance, in maybe certain non-permissive environments or other types of equipment. And in that case, having a telemeter is certainly going to be something that's going to be beneficial to you. Aside from range finding, what you can do with this is kind of some of the main things that I kind of focus on is being able to measure angles. You can use it for trilateration. Sorry, I can't speak. Which we'll do a video on that specifically. In my two books, Guerrilla Radio, a Urban Guide to Conflict Communications, I break down different ways in which you can use this device for radio communications. So radios operate on line of sight for VHF and UHF radio frequencies. And so you can use this device for range finding to find out kind of what your line of sight is, to know what the functionality of your radio could potentially be if you've got a clear view ahead of you. Another thing that you can do is, because you can use these devices to measure angles. Angles are very important in radio communications, in particular with antenna design and measuring how those antennas perform, which is called the takeoff angle. And so you can kind of get a rough idea of the angle that you need to make, say, certain types of antennas that require particular types of angles. And then as far as the takeoff angles go, you can use it to, if you need to communicate in an urban environment where there's lots of glass, how to measure the angle in which you can kind of penetrate through that glass. And then lastly, I would say, is in direction finding, which when we talk about trilaterization in the next video, we'll go into a little bit more detail of how that works and how you can use it for direction finding in that regard. But it would be able to, find out where someone might be broadcasting or transmitting a radio signal in a particular area, and you can kind of use your Winson telemeter to find that exact location. So in my guide on unconventional medical systems, we talk about how to use the telemeter. In particular, one area we talk about is on how to set up a landing zone for a helicopter. That you need to know certain angles and heights of things around in order to find a safe place for a helicopter to land, as well as a relatively flat area. You don't want too much gradient in there for that helicopter to land in an ideal situation. And so the telemeter can be handy in that regard. You could also use it for things like measuring range of motion of an appendage after an injury as well. So lots of function in here. It's almost endless. And so the things that I talk about in this video today are just kind of scraping the surface. If you are interested in reading a little bit more about kind of general use and non-permissive environment use of the WNDSN telemeter, then you can actually go to our blog at www.blackswanoutdoors.com and read a little bit more about that. Now, there's two telemeters here that I have on the table. Kind of the standard black telemeter and a white telemeter. There's different varieties of telemeters, some made out of brass, some out of clear acrylic that you can put a glow stick onto and make it glow and use it in low light environment. The two that I have here are just a good, I think, a pretty good representative of the product range with the slight variations in the products. The white certainly has an advantage over the black in that if you are in low light conditions, you can read this a little bit better. However, the black can double as a signal mirror or a signaling device as well, which we'll do a video on that in the future. But you know, the larger quadrant, you can actually telemeter. This is actually shaped as a quadrant, whereas the smaller one is a little bit more card size. So this can fit in your wallet. This could fit. I just keep this in this escape and evasion kit, or just toolkit, or whatever you want to call it. But it's nice and handy size that you can just put in a shirt pocket, a wallet, whatever, and kind of have it on your person. Whereas this instrument is just a little bit bigger. I would argue that because it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit more accurate, and you can do a little bit more with this as well. Now, the full name for the telemeter is a quadrant telemeter. It's because it's got two sides. There's a quadrant side, and then there's the telemeter side. And so telemeter is tele meaning distance, I think in Greek. So telemeter means measure distance. And quadrant is referring to the ability to measure angles. And so you can use this as an inclometer. Say if you were hiking and you're concerned about avalanche, you could use this to measure then the steepness of that hill, of whether or not you should travel in that area. But where we get the term quadrant from, or where we typically apply it, is in celestial navigation. And that's really where this one, this particular telemeter really shines, in celestial navigation or long distance navigation. Now, you can't specifically find your coordinates with this device, in that you can easily find and measure you know, stars, and so that you're able to find your latitude because of that. So for example, Polaris. But your longitude is a little bit more difficult, and I have a whole post on that on my Patreon that if you're interested in checking out, it's free, I believe. So you can check that out, and it kind of runs down through all the different analog ways in which you can communicate, that you can navigate using your WNDSN telemeter and other devices as well. What makes this particular model different as well is that it's called a Hori quadrant telemeter, because it's going to be set to your specific latitude. So when you order this, you want to make sure that you provide the good people at WNDSN your latitude so that they can custom make this. And particularly what we're concerned about is this right here. This is what's called a calendarium. So it's basically just a calendar, and you use this to measure the sun, and you put the measurement of the sun as in relation with your day of the month, and this is going to be able to tell you many different things that you can use with this, but in particular You could use it to figure out, okay, well, if you needed to get from A to B, how much daylight's left in that day for you to be able to travel that distance? Are you going to be able to make it by dark? Are you going to be able to find, can you use this to find your location, and a whole host of other very interesting things that you can do with this. So essentially, why this is an advantage, in particular for navigation, say if you're on a drift on a raft or on a sailboat, and you lost all your navigation components, is that you would need to have a whole bunch of charts with you, namely your sun charts, sun tables, and this device essentially means that you can travel without those things, or that if you were in an emergency situation, you wouldn't need them. You wouldn't need to have access to those tables. So that's a huge advantage, and particularly for an emergency situation.